Welcome back to Inspiring Entrepreneurs, Canada's longest-running radio show spotlighting business leaders is now a podcast. My name is Dan Delmar of TNKR Media.
And my name is Michael Newton from BDO Canada.
Mike, where in this fine country do we find you today?
You find me sitting at my desk in Montreal.
Beautiful Montreal, and I am an hour north in the wilderness of the Laurentians. Today's show is all about succession, so we're talking about succession in Ottawa and succession when it comes to our own family planning, our own business planning. Davide Pisanu of ClearEstate is with us today. They are a startup, a few years old, backed by some prominent investors, including a bank, and they want to simplify estate planning and settlement. The settlement part, very complicated.
Most definitely. I think succession has become a hot topic across the board. I mean, we saw this starting 10 years ago. I think COVID, for most things, accelerated. This is one of those things that it deferred. I think pricing, I think the ability to move forward with certain plans, they ended up getting delayed because of COVID and the fallout from COVID from a business perspective. We're also seeing, I think, a lot of changes now with tariffs and everything else, which is putting people a little on edge. But realistically speaking, the transition in front of us is still astronomical. And it's putting a lot of pressure on a lot of people. We're starting to see, you and I were having this conversation off air earlier about this whole discussion about, impossible goals and trying to reach things and trying to get things done. And I think it's creating a whole new wave of an attempt at people to try and prioritize, because we know between AI, technology, and everything that's out there, all we keep feeling like is we have more tools to be efficient, but we feel like we're being less efficient.
So lots to discuss in current events, including how the Cardi administration will be for Canadian business. And we'll also get to the thorny issue of interprovincial trade. But first, a word on the guest today. Davide Pisanu is from ClearEstate. They're a new company here in Montreal, and they're all about estate planning and settlement A to Z. They started out in estate settlement, Mike, which when I started, full disclosure, working with them, I was shocked to learn that in the very best case scenario, you're looking at a year and a half of some really painful bureaucracy and some back and forth and waiting and some very frankly distressing and sometimes triggering work ahead of you if you are an executor. So they do professional executorship too, taking that burden off the plate of typically the son or daughter of the deceased, but it does vary. And they do estate planning now as well. So everything A to Z in this financial hub. They're well funded. Power Corp is in there along with the National Bank and OMERS, the Ontario Municipal Fund. So a very interesting tech product co-founded by people with Silicon Valley experience and led by our guest today, Davide Pisanu, former government lawyer, worked for Cirque du Soleil and helped their transition as well. So it's a really very interesting, eclectic group of professionals who are tackling this incredibly difficult and even very unpleasant task.
Yeah, and one of those eclectic professionals is somebody who actually worked for me at Fuller Landau and at BDO, Amanda Corey, who has now joined the team, which I didn't realize initially when we booked Davide, but I guess in doing a little bit of research, you find out things that that are a little close to home. So I think that's a really good addition to their team. The estate component and trusteeship and everything that comes around this. For anybody who's close to it, where it's a family member, obviously there's a massive emotional component to all of this. And for anybody who's not, I mean, ultimately, if you're a professional, it's being added to the executor base to clear an estate that a year and a half, I think, Dan, is being optimistic for most. I mean, I've seen them go on for decades in some cases, depending on how the estates and the wills were drafted. So realistically speaking, it can be a long and arduous process. It can be a risky process for an executor, because we all know that the family seems to get along nicely when mom and dad are still around, but once the parents leave, the kids have a tendency to become a little more self-serving and can create some really, really ugly scenarios.
So Davide's co-founder, Alex Gauthier, went through a tough time when his mom died, and he started navigating this process and built his own sort of Excel spreadsheet, which slowly became the first version of ClearEstate, helping him navigate the process. And he figured at the time, why are people being victimized or re-victimized in this way from the bureaucracy? At least what ClearEstate can promise, and they can't get rid of the bureaucracy, right? But they can help guide you through it, or even have someone do all the paperwork for you. So it's an interesting value proposition there, because for some people, just the time and the anguish that this process caused, not everyone can extract a business out of it as Alex did. For most, it's just an incredible time suck and just seems like the worst task.
Yeah, I think the hardest part going to be for ClearEstate is going to be ultimately the one matter that comes down to the intangible, which is trust factor in an executive group. So that we're going to talk to him about how they've, how they're bridging that trust gap, moving this into a tech platform, away from, I guess, to a certain degree, the face-to-face. I certainly look at it, obviously as a professional, having been around this for 35 plus years, I'm always going to err on the side of somewhere of having that trust factor and people that are there. But there is a massive amount of work in here that ultimately can be, as you say, debureaucratized in the process, and I think that's how they're getting their initial platform. But I think you're going to see this develop way beyond that over time. Here, you're also dealing with different parts. Remember Quebec and the civil common law mentality differences between Quebec and Ontario, or Quebec and the rest of Canada. You're starting to see a lot of people in Canada who are actually trying to settle a lot of this themselves. So it's clearly something like ClearEstate is going to be a very strong platform for that environment.
It was a good talk with Davide, and I'm sure that you'll learn a lot. I certainly have, following these conversations. It's just, it's just a really dense process that you just wonder why can't it be simpler? Speaking of Ottawa, there's been some changes. We have a new prime minister, of course, Mark Carney. So the federal election win goes in his direction. It's a minority government, but close enough to a majority that the prime minister is behaving that way, certainly signaling that with his cabinet picks. And then, of course, we have the king who visited to deliver the throne speech, King Charles. This projects, obviously, certainly a lot of confidence and a lot of hopefully relying on some tradition. A lot of conservatives, I think, may have been happy to see the king present and to see, at least in tone, Mark Carney signaling that maybe it's time to do things a bit more differently in Ottawa. What's your take about the tone of sort of clamping down on government waste that we heard in the throne speech, contrasted, Mike, with the budget, which many are saying sort of picks up from where the previous prime minister left off in terms of spending?
Well, I think the summary I have from most people is they would have loved to have had Mark Carney win as leader of the Conservatives. So if you take that thought process and you answer the question you just asked me, I think you see where the problem lies. I think you're dealing in a liberal base that is still heavy spending, has not really found a way to necessarily fund that spending unless it's an increase in tax. And I think we're going to continue to see big government and big intervention in Canada, which, from my perspective, is not great for business at the end of the day. We want to cut spending. We want to try and make government leaner and more efficient. I'm not sure a left-leaning liberal agenda is necessarily going to get us there at this point. So, like I said, my summary comes back to we'd really be doing well if Carney was leading the Conservatives going forward, but that is not what we're dealing with. However, having said that, I think Carney brings a lot of credibility and a lot of experience to the table. Certainly with his interactions so far with President Trump have been positive. I think there's a respect level from President Trump that we haven't seen towards a Canadian Canadian Prime Minister under President Trump's involvement. And you've got to take the wins where you can right now, and certainly the tariff drama will continue to play out over the next little while. A large part of that is political. It's a political game. It doesn't mean we're not going to see any tariffs at the end of the day, but I also don't think we're going to see the high level of tariffs. And Dan, you and I have been talking about this for almost 6 months now. That this is a chess game that's going on between leaders of major economies, and it's far from over. From the King perspective, I think the last time someone was here. I think the Queen was here 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I think was the last time that she was in Canada. And, it's interesting to look at King Charles's very positive approach on Canada's sovereignty, on its identity, who it is. And clearly, if you read between the lines, it was a very strong support of not becoming the 51st state coming from King Charles.
Absolutely. In political commentary, I've probably been involved in debates lately that have had the people ask the question, well, is it really an affirmation of our sovereignty to have a foreign leader, so-called foreign leader, come to Canada to deliver the throne speech? He's not really a foreign leader, right? Canada still has a king. I'm not exactly Captain Monarchist myself, right? I think that's an open conversation, what Canada looks like in the future in terms of its role with the monarchy, in terms of the reliance on at least a hereditary monarch, all debatable in the long term. But today, currently, in reality, Canada has a king. And so this is an affirmation of our sovereignty, actually. It's a positive move, good for the markets, too. It's a signal that we're not going to back down, that we're open to partnering up with the UK and Europe. And to me, it's just a reassuring sign that we're taking ourselves seriously as a nation.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also interesting that he does continue to push for us to find that middle ground between Canada and the U.S. trade, recognizing that, obviously the U.S. is our largest trading partner. And in your commentary on, the monarch bringing kind of a positive spin on sovereignty is an important one, I think, from the consideration that the size of Canada and the importance of Canada on an international economy, is maybe not as influential as we would like it to be just based on pure size. But the more positive commentary you get from international presence, I think the more that lends to the, the Canadian mentality of saying, I'm sorry when you walk into the door. So I think a little bit of hearing that positivity coming from somebody else reminds us that we should stay on the right track.
Let's get into a little bit of tariffs and recession talk, where we're at, what people should prepare for in terms of their business heading into the summer. So the tariff situation is now going back and forth between the U.S. courts. So this week, the International Court of Trade, which is a federal court, blocked the sweeping global trade tariffs. They will appeal. It'll go back and forth, Supreme Court, whatever, but it's unclear whether or not any mechanism within the U.S. Will be able to alleviate these tariffs. So we have to assume, I guess, for now, Mike, that they'll be with us for quite some time to come. Is that the assumption that we're going with? And will that lead to a scenario where we should expect a recession around the corner?
Well, not that the two are mutually exclusive, but I'll attack them mutually exclusively. I mean, I think the discussion on the international courts is a very interesting one, because I think it calls into question who has the right and who has the power to make a decision. Certainly, President Trump and his team are going to say that, an unelected official on an international court does not have the power to decide on the U.S.'s position on tariffs. I can't give you my legal opinion on that because I only play a lawyer on the weekend. But realistically speaking, I think there is some truth to that in terms of what that international effect can be. Whether they can impose the tariffs unilaterally like they have, I guess, is one question. But we all know that it's not just about imposing tariffs. It's about making doing business more difficult. So if the tariffs for some reason were to be quashed on an international court, you can be guaranteed they'll find another way in order to address some of the things that need to be done. If I look at that from a recessionary standpoint, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of push to continue to try and bring the cost of living down. I mean, the King even mentioned that in his speech about having the government bring down the cost of living to everyone. I certainly feel that the influence in the U.S. market right now is one of the interest rates are much higher than they are in Canada. So there is room to bring them down if there is some inflationary pressure. Whether they will or they won't could be another battle between the Federal Reserve and the president at this point. But I guess that'll play out. Are we moving into a recessionary? I mean, realistically, in Canada, we've been there for a couple of quarters now. So, I'm not sure how much more there is to prepare for unless we get battered with massive tariffs that we all think at this point is part of a game. So it's going to be hard to tell what that means. But I do feel in any kind of situation like this, I mean, there's a lot of optimism and a lot of positivity that can be gained. I mean, from a business perspective, which, most of the time is why we're supposed to be talking to each other, Dan. But from a business perspective, I mean, the reality here is, anything that's positive or negative provides an opportunity. The negative actually provides more of an opportunity because a lot of people stop doing things or stay stagnant in the world that they're living in, going down the rabbit hole to a certain degree. So it provides a lot of opportunity if you're willing to take some risk, if you're willing to reach out into a new market, if you're interested in dropping a new product. I mean, a lot of these things, this is actually the time to do it more so than it is in an economy that's flying along where everybody is just selling, and you're up against a much larger base.
Okay, one last word on the king. Alex Panetta, the CBC correspondent in the U.S., says this: hearing King Charles read out the words GST credit for first-time home buyers is a trip.
Yeah, well, let's not get me started on the taxation in this country, between the tax that we pay at source plus the tax that we pay on we buy something and then the tax that's left over afterwards. And all it seems like we're always paying tax. So, yeah, to hear the concept of tax discussed by a monarch is an interesting concept.
I just want to give a friend of mine, Scott Leung, who's a partner at Panache Ventures, a shout out because he had this he had this LinkedIn status that I really liked. And Scott writes, why not create an RRSP style tax deduction for angel investments into tech startups or SMBs? A lot of regular Canadians are willing to take risk and be entrepreneurial with their money. I agree, and I think this principle could be broadly applied. Yes, fewer subsidies, less Canada Inc., less Quebec Inc., but also like a great way to supercharge a new industry isn't to create a whole new level of bureaucracy and government compliance around it. I think of the Green Homes Initiative. So when we bought our house and started renovating and all that, we were eligible for all these credits, all these green home credits, but we had to do all this paperwork and buy the stuff at a certain place and have the inspections and all that. And at the end of the exercise, Mike, we weren't saving more than 10, 15% on everything, which struck me was roughly the cost of the sales tax. Why not just take off the sales tax on stuff on industries that you need to boost or give them tax relief, and then just let them go. That's it. That's just let them go and avoid the unnecessary creation of all these apparatuses and funds and bureaucracies, and just stop with the taxes for things that we want to take off.
You're playing into the left-right argument on an ongoing basis, right? Is how much government intervention is too much government intervention? Should there be any at all? And the reality of the size of government. I mean, the discussion of what happens if you let an industry go and you pull out the sales tax, for example, and you look at the effect on the business, but then you have to look at, well, how do we fund what the government's doing on other things, right? So now you're sitting in a situation where you got a whole bunch of bureaucrats that might have no job at the end of the day because we're not pulling in enough money in that area. We could all argue that the long-term effect is exponential and it works out better to allow the industry to drive. Problem is nobody gets elected for 10 years down the road, and everybody's getting elected for today or yesterday or tomorrow and nothing past, next Tuesday type of mentality. So the right long-term play often doesn't come out while we try to solve the immediacy of what's going on. And if you mentioned earlier, the budget and the discussion, I mean, the dollars that are put on the table are astronomical. Nobody's figured out where they're going to come from yet. And to cut a tax out of a department or on topics that we think should be fueled, I think is a great idea. Unfortunately, I don't think it helps solve the budget that's there. The interesting side to all of this is, half the people, if not more than that, don't necessarily understand the investment component. I mean, go back to the whole debate on capital gains in terms of a 50% or a 75% inclusion rate. And are you effectively subsidizing by a reduced capital gain? What was the goal of that? The goal of that was to increase investment, right? So instead, it's increased investment in the stock market. It hasn't really taken on more risk from a business Inc. perspective. And, you know, we everybody that's fought the capital gain side, if you're sitting in a stock market with a huge portfolio, your rationale, to me, is not as strong in supporting the economy, is that 50% or 25% inclusion at some of the things you're talking about in terms of incentivizing risk. And, you know, there has to be a premium for risk. If there's no premium for risk, there is no incentive, there is no innovation.
When I went to get my tax rebate for the windows, Mike, we got it from the federal side.
So you have to
and then I went to get it from the provincial side, and they said, where are your stickers? To which I said, well, I submitted all the stickers. But they said, no, you submit it to the federal. You have to also submit the stickers on each window. Every single window, Mike, you have to take a picture of every sticker on every window. And you have to submit that to the provincial too, but I didn't have that, so I didn't get the provincial tax credit for the windows.
So Dan, you want to take this back to, we have once again lost the concept of customer service and fluidity of business in exchange for compliance and checking the boxes and ticking things. So, yeah, if you get me started on that one, we're not going to get to anything else.
It was just so crazy because, going through the process by doing these verifications, what they're saying is that we don't we think you might be bulk buying these windows and maybe making a profit from them or doing something illicit. I'm just buying windows for my house. That's easily verifiable. None of this is necessary. Just take off the tax and go away.
But drive behind that, Dan. Why is everybody so afraid to take your word? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're living in an environment where everybody has to cover their butt. Right? So you go to the Quebec government and you don't show up with the stickers, and the individual says, you know what, I trust you. You're a good-looking guy, Dan. I trust you and your family, and I know you're only using them for this. So you turn around and he says, okay. And then something happens afterwards and he loses his job because everybody's got such stringent reporting procedures. I mean, it stuns me at how difficult it has become to do business. And I'm getting on in my career, and I got to tell you, I'm not so sure I'd want to start a career right now at 25 years old, knowing what I know from when I started at 25 years old, in terms of the bureaucracy and the hoops to jump through. Like, I can see the evolution in 35 years in practice. Okay, evolution might be a strong word. It might be the negative of evolution in terms of the ability to do business. And you know what? Yes, there are people that are, excuse my language, going to screw the system. But you know what? They're going to do it no matter what. So all you're doing is you're punishing the 95% of the population that is really good and honest. You're telling everybody, we don't trust you. So you better show up with whatever it is you need to show up with. And you know what? And in the meantime, we're going to hide behind. And then we wonder why we're losing ground to other economies and other countries.
Speaking of competitiveness, we did want to squeeze in interprovincial trade because that's constantly coming up, and it was mentioned in the throne speech, and we should expect some action on that. This is one that I think is often caricatured by media and by politicians because I don't think most people realize how difficult this is going to be. We talk a lot about booze, for instance, how it's really hard to buy booze from one province to the next. Fine, that you can solve pretty quickly, I think, especially in the online ordering environment. You can't order wine from BC, for instance, to Quebec. Like, silly things like that can be undone very, very quickly. When you go industry by industry and get into the credentials industry, we mentioned the compliance industries, the duplication of professional services and regulatory bodies across every single province and territory, you sort of get the picture of a country that is not only inefficient, but that has to take some time to become more efficient. You can't do this quickly because if you were to wave a magic wand and get rid of the concept of interprovincial trade barriers, especially among all these various regulatory agencies, you're throwing hundreds of thousands of people out of work very quickly and probably plunging ourselves into a deeper recession, I would speculate. So this kind of transition to a truly free trade country is necessary, but I would guess something that has to happen pretty gradually.
Well, two things. One, if I was a cartoonist, I would be having fun with this on a daily basis. Just how difficult this is going to be to try and proceed. And two, it's interesting how we've had free trade with most countries, but we can't seem to have free trade amongst our own provinces at the end of the day. Why? It's a tax base, right? It's really all about the allocation of dollars. And, like you said, there's a number of jobs at stake, but even deeper than that, there really is, the provincial tax grabs on items that, alcohol is a great example. The provincially regulated, and if I start ordering wine from Vancouver and it came in, well, I wouldn't be either A, supporting Quebec, and B, certainly not paying the same tax rate. So this is going to continue to be a problem for us. I don't see, my favorite is when we first started to talk about this, we said by June that we would have, some major impact. I would like to know what June they were referring to, if that was 30-30 or, I just don't see this happening so quickly for the reasons that you mentioned at the end of the day. Whether that plunges us deeper into recession, I'm not sure. But again, we live in a world that needs immediate gratification and not what is best for us 5 years or 10 years down the road. And certainly as we try to navigate through the tariff world, the easiest thing would be to try and sell to ourselves at the end of the day. And we're not going to succeed at that one so simply either.
Just to illustrate one last thing on interprovincial trade, I got this example inspired by our last guest, David McMillan, the co-founder of Joe Beef, and he's in the wine business as well. And so you could actually, it's not legal to order wine from a vineyard in Ontario that's just a short drive away, 10 minutes in some cases to the west or to the west of the island of Montreal. That's no good. But if you want a certain bottle of wine from the furthest reaches of Quebec, like thousands of kilometers away, that you can order online and have it shipped to your house. So it's kind of illogical on a logistics perspective, climate change as well. We just need to be more efficient as a country.
Yeah, the problem is a lot of this is really, and this is not a political statement, but it is the left-leaning mentality of protectionism to a certain degree, as opposed to free markets. And I got to tell you, after all of these years in business, I'm not sure either one of them seems to work properly. We can't seem to get the protectionist down right, and we sure as hell can't seem to get the free market concept down right either. So I don't know where that's going to take us, but if you gave me one wish with a magic wand or with Men in Black's little zapper, I would say let's forget what happened yesterday and let's look at what would be best for tomorrow. Problem is every single decision we made is based on history of some form or something that we did yesterday, and it's either I don't want to admit I was wrong, or let's see, we've done it for so long, this is the way we need to do it, or you can't make the change, and there's so much history in such a little period of time, especially in the tax world. I mean, when you consider that taxation is a relatively new concept at the levels that we're used to in the last 50 years, that there's just no way anybody forgets.
All right, so speaking of government bureaucracy, Davide Pisanu of ClearEstate is on the way. But first, some advice for entrepreneurs. Mike, you wanted to discuss this piece from HBR. When you are asked to meet impossible goals, especially lately in the current context, recession, pandemic, or whatever, a lot of managers, a lot of executives are facing, in some cases, some impossible problems. What's your advice for them?
Yeah, I think a lot of things are going on. Obviously, the AI is creating a lot of uncertainty for a lot of people, so everybody's wanting to take on and tackle more. I think we're expected to do more with more in terms of technology. Some days I feel like we're doing more with less in the grand scheme, and certainly more in less time. And an interesting stat in this article is 5 times more planned initiatives have occurred in the last decade than when we've been used to. So, I mean, obviously a lot of people are being thrown into environments where, they're dealing with stretch goals, they're dealing with beyond stretch goals, stretched way too thin goals at the end of the day. And we're starting to see some of the literature that is actually coming up with the term strategic refusal. And, the real leadership skill is not figuring out how to do it. It's knowing when, how, and what priority to deal with on all of this. And, the one thing that caught me, and, yes, I am a CPA at heart, so there was a matrix, and I guess that's some of the economist and the finance guy in me too. But the matrix that I saw on the strategic refusal is very interesting. And, looking at the axes, you've got the execution feasibility. Do we have the capacity, resources, and timelines to execute efficiently and effectively? So, low to high. And on the other axis, you've got strategic importance. How important really is what I'm being asked to do? So really what you're trying to do, if you've only got so many hours in the day and so much energy, is once again, it's that fourth quadrant, right? It's high execution feasibility, high strategic importance, and focus on those areas. Those are the areas to commit to and to focus to in ensuring the execution and the resource alignment is available. At that point, some of the other things you can start to push back on a little bit. If it's not really high on the strategic importance, well, why am I going to do it first? Right? The problem is, I think we get bombarded with so many tasks and so many jobs and so many initiatives that we lose track of why we're doing them. And whether that's an entrepreneur or whether that is an employee, either one of those groups are facing the same challenges. Okay, you're facing so much to do in order to succeed and move forward, and you have to find a way to deprioritize those matters that really aren't going to be the best at getting things done. The problem you have is when the entrepreneur and the individual can't align on what priority is. Right now, you're going to have a bit of a problem, and I think that's what we're going to continue to struggle. But as we continue to move forward in a recessionary period, in some of the concerns that's still ahead of us with tariffs, we are going to continue to be pushed to do more and more and more, and in order to get anything accomplished. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had the chance to watch somebody who has so much to do on their desk, and they sit there and they stare into space because they just don't know where to start. And I think a lot of people have that kind of blank staring feeling at this time. And you know what? I could argue that being face-to-face in an office environment helps us prioritize because we can talk, we can interact with each other. I'm going to have a whole generation. People are going to tell me, hey, when I'm at home, I can prioritize on what I want because nobody's standing over me. Once again, we're at a deadlock.
Yeah, well, it's on today's program, you have two partially virtual businesses up against you, Mike. We have my own and Davide Pisanu from ClearEstate. They are also partially virtual, and they like the culture. It works for them, but they also do have an in-person element as well. So we'll get to that and more topics, certainly about the complexities of estate planning, estate settlement, and government bureaucracy, why more and more tech products are starting to tackle government-generated problems. That's all coming up next on Inspiring Entrepreneurs. Conversations with Canadian business leaders. We've been a radio show since 2009 and we're now online only. So do subscribe and rate us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcast. Let's get right to our guest. Mike, he is the CEO of Estate Settlement and Planning Solutions, ClearEstate. Davide Pisanu joins us. Hi, Davide.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good.
You're joining us today from Montreal.
From Montreal.
So first question is the easiest, Davide. What is ClearEstate?
ClearEstate is the only full-service estate planning and estate settlement platform in Canada. ClearEstate was started to really focusing on the pain of the executor. So we launched ClearEstate as a platform to support executors through their experience administering the estate, a very challenging experience. And we grew from there. People started asking us, can you support estate planning and can you potentially develop or offer professional executorship? But at the heart, ClearEstate was always about simplifying and making the experience of the executor a better one.
So I'm gonna jump right into a little bit of complexity here. This whole discussion of professional executorship. For years, our clients in the accounting industry and the legal industry have traditionally had an accountant and a lawyer as an executor on their wills because in most cases they're the most trusted advisor. They've been together for a long time. They provide an expertise that most of the family can't provide. Though we're starting to see, because of the AML or the anti-money laundering laws, a lot of people being discontinuing these roles because they are offside in a lot of the professional environments. What is that meaning to you? Are you starting to see some of that move your way? And maybe just describe what a professional executor is to start off with.
So typical families will appoint in their wills as an executor, so as the person that will have to manage the estates when the person passes away. So that liquidates the assets, pays the debts, does the distributions according to the will. Most people will appoint, surviving spouse, kids, friend of the family, and when you go up market a little bit, people will go to, accountants, lawyers, so on and so forth. That's kind of like the traditional way of doing things. It's the way that's been done for decades, if not centuries. I think what we're seeing lately is, as you pointed out, a couple of things. Number one is there's less and less people in the market that actually specialize in this space, correct? So because it's actually, there's not a lot of money to be made for these single or solo practitioners out there in this particular space, just because they don't have the volume, correct? They don't have the scale, and therefore this is kind of like an add-on services, or it's kind of something that they do as a favor to their clients. But it's not really something that they, first of all, enjoy doing because it's really painful, and second, that they really specialize in. Second, as you pointed out, a lot of professional bodies, both in the wealth management space, in the legal space, in the accounting space, have either cautioned or ruled against people actually playing that role, just for conflict of interest purposes, correct? Because like, you're providing advice on one hand, you're actually acting on the other. You might be having to pursue certain transactions. You may charge fees for those transactions that are professional fees on top of your executorship fees. So there's a lot of problems out there. And third, you name a lawyer that's 50 years old, that lawyer has maybe 10, 15, 20 years of practice in front of him or her. What happens when they want to retire, correct? What happens when they want to move away from their practice? And then they need to find a solution for that particular problem. And so what we've seen lately at ClearEstate with, so we basically have set up a trust infrastructure in order to play that role. Most Canadians are maybe not aware, but corporate, the only corporate entities in the country that can actually play the role of an executor or a trustee are trust companies, either provincial trust companies or federal trust companies. And what we've seen lately is slowly, gradually a move towards, using trust companies rather than professionals. Both because, well, trust companies have been around for a long time, and therefore they're still going to be around a long time. That's number one. And number two is those professionals are becoming more and more disinterested in these roles. We actually have lawyers and accountants knocking at our door, basically on a weekly basis, asking us to take over their practices. Not their whole practices, obviously, but the portion of the practice that's related to executorship. Just because they don't want it anymore. And that's a huge risk for Canadian families, to appoint a lawyer who in 10 years might not be interested anymore. And so that's kind of the solution we're offering.
Yeah, and I think from a lot of places, there was one word that we both left out, which is the term risk. And there's just so much risk involved to an executor in terms of what may happen from, a fighting family. Of course, we never see a family disagree on death, so, everything is smooth. That was my turn at sarcasm, Dan. Practically speaking, the risk associated with a lot of this, and like you said, an estate can go on, depending on what that estate is and whether there's a trust in place, spousal trust, whatever the case, these can go on for decades. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, A, don't want to take the ongoing risk, and B, like you said, it's not the most lucrative of jobs.
So first of all, one of a statistic that we often use at ClearEstate is 75% of people that have actually experienced being an executor describe it as one of the most traumatic events of their lives. So naming a family member or the lawyer sister-in-law as executor, that's not a gift, correct? It's a curse. Yeah. And so that's not a pleasant thing to do, although a lot of people do it out of loyalty or out of care, out of love, but it's not a fun job. And second is, it can be a lucrative business. We're showing it at ClearEstate, but it's a lucrative business at scale. It's not a lucrative business subscale. And this is where many of these practices, I mean, if you're a lawyer that has, like 50 or 75 wills that you're named upon, you're never going to build an at scale business. Like this is a side job that you're doing, on a Thursday afternoon. And therefore, you don't invest in the systems, you don't invest in the technology, you don't spread your risk across many estates, because there's risk on any estate, just like insurance, for example. But as long as you have like a certain volume, then you can spread your risk, across multiple files, quote unquote. And this is why we're seeing in the market a growing trend towards the use of trusts.
I think the other challenge that we're facing in all of this is, I don't know the statistics, but there are a whole lot of people, unfortunately, who pass away. And there's no necessity for a high level executor or an expensive trust relationship subsequent. It's, they had 100,000 in a RIF and they had maybe their house left, and it doesn't require high end, but for most people who don't know what to do, they don't have checklists, they don't have the availability of information, and in many cases they've been forced to go to an environment that is a costly environment in order to facilitate and take some of the risk away. One of the things I love on the website that you guys have and the way you work is the checklist model of what needs to be done, how to address things, whether that's pre when you're doing the planning and whether that's post and what involves being done. You kind of bring this back down to the majority of people who are going to pass away and their families.
Yeah, I think what we've tried to do for a clear estate is transform the way estates are settled. I always say that wealth doesn't correlate with complexity and vice versa, in the sense of like you can have a very reasonably sized estate, but still be very complex because of family dynamics with certain types of assets. Think the cottage, like the cottage is the typical example of something that may bring complexity and something that may look relatively simple from outside. But what we've tried is to develop solutions for every type of estate and kind of make it very simple for every Canadian out there to deal with the situation according to what they actually need, what they actually need. Um, uh, we often forget that it doesn't matter if you have a dollar or $100 million. The day you pass away, an estate is created and it needs to be settled. And there's various stakeholders out there that don't really care about the level of wealth, correct? The CRA, Revenue Quebec, wherever, it doesn't really matter whether you have $25,000 or $500,000. They're going to come after you, and they're going to come after you as an executor personally. So if the debts of the estate are actually not settled, the tax debts of the estates are actually not settled, you're personally liable for those. And so it's important, even for small estates, to, as you point out, make sure that the boxes are checked, that everything's covered properly, and that you avoid personal liability.
It's funny you guys were talking about the so-called honor of being an executor. I've seen situations where people almost feel that they are become a matriarch or the patriarch of the family because they're appointed the executor, and not quite familiar with how arduous the process is. Which brings me to your origin story, Davide. And full disclosure, we have worked with you guys on telling your story a little bit, but your co-founder, Alex, when his mom died tragically, he went through this process, which takes at least a year and a half, probate and all of that. And this is how the product started, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us a bit of that origin story?
Yeah, so Alex went through the experience of being an executor twice actually in his life, both of his parents, unfortunately. And he was a bit of a product person on his own, and kind of thought, well, there has to be a better way, correct? Like that, there has to be a better way than me having to build my own Excel spreadsheet, me having to call a million professionals that are not really willing to help me, and if they are, then the fees are just too high for the value of the estate, and so that was kind of the impetus for version one, I would say, of ClearEstate. That's 5 years ago, where we thought, well, why don't we just develop, there's another great company out there that did this for something that seemed very, very complex, which is TurboTax, and so why don't we just go TurboTax for estate administration, where you capture the information once, you process the information, and then you spit out with software whatever needs to be produced, whether it's a probate form, whether it's a tax filing, whether it's a notice to creditors, whatever it is. And that was, I would say, 4 years and a half ago, how we started the business, creating that software. Obviously, the business has grown since there, and we do many other things. But that was the impetus for the start of ClearEstate.
It's not often, Davide, that I'm going to push and promote the website address here, but I think there's just so much here for anybody at, at any level just to understand what's involved. So www.clearestate.com, and you can really just go in there and move through things. I mean, there's nobody exempted from this process in life at some point, right? So even if it's purely an understanding of what goes on, whether it's to see what's out there, whether you're redoing your will, whether you're doing your will for the first time, these are all questions. And I think the hardest thing that we address as professionals when dealing with estates is getting people to have that first conversation. Is many times they just don't want to talk about their own demise, or their family doesn't want to talk about the demise of a loved one. And people push this off, and in some cases until it's too late. I guess with the way you deal with things, how does that draw people in, and how do you get them talking about what needs to be talked about?
Well, in our experience, so you're absolutely right, correct? That people don't want to talk about this stuff. I mean, nobody wants to talk about their own death, and people don't want to talk about their parents' death, and so on and so forth. In our experience on the planning side, there's typically triggering events. So if you're young couple, buying your first house or having a child, that's typically a trigger. That's typically a trigger for some kind of an estate planning conversation. I think as people age and complexity increases, I think when mortality becomes a little bit more part of your horizon, so in your 50s and 60s and 70s, what we tend to how we tend to talk about estate planning is as an act of love, correct? Like when you plan your estate, I mean, the reality is that you're going to be dead. Therefore, you don't really care. Right? You're not going to pay the price for whatever bad planning you did. But if you truly care about your family, if you truly care about your kids, if you truly care about your surviving spouse, just a little bit of planning, a little bit of thinking can go a long way in making the living actually have a more pleasant experience post death. And I think that's how we draw people in, because it's really an emotional connection. It's an emotional decision. It's an emotional conversation, and it's really about extending the care and the love and your legacy up to a certain point beyond death.
I'm going to correct you on one thing, Davide. I have seen many clients control from the grave. So, I'm not so sure that part that you mentioned, and once you're dead, you don't care anymore. I've seen a lot of people set that up so they could continue to care even though they couldn't feel.
I think you care pre-death what's going to happen after, depending on your personal beliefs. Post-death, you're supposed to be in a better world. So
yeah, well, you know what? If you're a control freak, it's amazing how many people set things up to continue their influence, even though they're no longer there.
What is the longest will or estate battle either of you have ever heard of?
I mean, there's the celebrity cases out there that I won't point to, but I'll tell you, at ClearEstate on a daily basis, we see through estate settlement families being torn apart over and it's, I wouldn't want to say it's silly things, because from the outside it looks silly, but for people it's important, correct? Like the tea set that's important to somebody, or the relationship that a power of attorney child, for example, would have had for 3, 4, 5 years with a parent, and then the parents, passes away, and then there's an estate, and the questioning around the expenses that went on pre-death and how that's settled through the estate. Like, those are the kinds of things where it gets very emotional. People, and because it's not transparent, right? And people don't fully understand what went on. And that's really where the lack of transparency and the lack of The lack of understanding creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger, and a lot of tension. So it's not always kind of like, like $1 million businesses or $1 million mansions. Sometimes it's stuff that's a lot smaller but has a lot of emotions attached to them.
Mike, what was the longest one you've ever heard of?
Well, I think there's a difference between battling the estate and settling the estate. I mean, where there may be a spousal trust in place, those can go on for decades. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to maintain if there's a tax deferral component to a spousal trust, you have to maintain the initial wishes of and the directions that came in the will. Otherwise, you lose that tax deferral component. So if you have an individual who dies at 50 and whose spouse was set up in a spousal trust and they live to be 90, you could be looking at being involved in these things for 40 years. From a dispute perspective, these are, and Davide is 100% correct. I have seen the most ludicrous fights over things that you would say, no, there's no way somebody's fighting over this. I've seen many go 4, 5, 6 years where, the battle has started, it's ended up in legal hands. There's a call I like to get, but I don't like to get, is when the lawyers call me and say, we need a mediator in this case. And part of me goes, cha-ching. And then part of me goes, oh Lord, this is not going to be pleasant. And you cannot win because it becomes emotional at that point. And there's this feeling that I got shortchanged, and why did my brother get this, and why did my mother give that to this one before she died? And it's why a lot of the encouragement on the, shall we call it, the smaller things, we're trying to get families to give them away before they die. We're trying to get them to settle up some of those estates, because remember, most siblings, so long as the mom and the dad are still alive, play nicely. The moment both of them are gone, now the true colors start to come out.
By the way, the longest in U.S. history was the Myra Clark Gaines case. It went for 57 years in the late 1800s, okay? And they appeared before the Supreme Court 17 times and 70 times at various federal courts. So anyway.
And guess where the estate went?
I'm not sure. I didn't read that far down, to be honest.
You don't have to. They went to the lawyers.
No. Good point. I want to talk a bit about the tech, Davide. Alex Gauthier, your co-founder, who started sort of coding this at a Microsoft Excel level early on, he teamed up with Pascal Brisset. Both of them are Silicon Valley veterans, and when you look at the platform, there's just a cleanliness, like a really nice, clean presentation to it. It looks like a really interesting hub that does prioritize transparency. So it's really easy to read, really user-friendly. Talk about the hub, the platform that is the center of ClearEstate.
When we started ClearEstate, the idea, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, was all about, I mean, you have all the information capture and the processing, whatever, but fundamentally it was about transparency and it was about simplicity, correct? Like I think it was really about step-by-step guidance, very transparent, very open. The platform on the estate settlement side and the estate planning, if you want, although not a lot of people want that, allows you to invite other users. So for example, if you're an executor, you can invite all the beneficiaries from the estate to the platform where they can track what happens on an ongoing basis. They can see the money flow, they can see where things are going, they can see the values. And so what we found since the beginning was, simplifying the process, making it very transparent, making it very user-friendly, using UI that is accessible even for an older audience, I would say. So an audience that's not been trained on TikTok, but that's probably more in their 50s or 60s. That's really been the guiding principles for developing that hub, for developing that platform, and it's what the users appreciate. We have a case in the past where two siblings were exchanging lawyer letters, like about to sue each other over an estate, and they gave ClearEstate a shot as a last resort before going to court. And simply having access, a common understanding and a common access to the platform where they saw what was going on, where they could agree on the numbers, where they could agree on what they were both seeing, resolve the dispute, correct? Because it was fundamentally a transparency issue. So that's been the guiding principle, and that's been what we've been pushing. Lately, obviously, like everybody, we've been leveraging AI and leveraging other tools in order to make processes more efficient and quicker, both for ourselves and our clients. But that doesn't really change the fact or the fundamental ethos of ClearEstate, which is about transparency, step-by-step guidance, and just making the process a lot simpler for everybody.
Got to tell you, for the longest time, it was so difficult to get a basic checklist. So, just being able to pick that up is been pretty cool. Pandemic pivot. Anything that you came out of the pandemic or walked into the pandemic thought process wise and made a major shift that you said, hey, you know what, we took advantage of this. We looked at whether that was a negative scenario that was involved and turned it into a positive.
It's really interesting because we were born in the pandemic, correct? Like that, as a company, we were born in 2020. And I would say that without being cynical about it, we kind of rode the tailwind of the pandemic up to a certain point where mortality became something I would say that was a lot more part of the daily conversation in North America than it was before the pandemic. So I think that we've although the company really grew a lot, kind of like out of the pandemic, we were born in the pandemic and benefited, I would say, from the general conversation around death. From an organizational standpoint, we were born in the pandemic, which means that we never had there's no such thing at ClearEstate as going back to what existed before the pandemic, which means that different working organizations work from home, the way that we use our real estate, the way that we use a physical presence or physical meetings is really kind of born out of or has evolved as out of an organization that was born in a completely remote world. And I think that has made ClearEstate I would say unique, but quite something to observe as it's evolved through time.
So, Davide, you're young, but you're not that young. You must have had a life before all of this, and I'm sure whether your shift into ClearEstate for 2020 when everything was started, where were you before, and how did you end up here?
So I'm born in Montreal. I went to law school here, trained as a lawyer, practiced law for almost a decade before moving on to business. Went to business school. Spent a couple of years at McKinsey, the consulting firm. Started my own consulting firm after that, and got an offer at some point to join Cirque du Soleil while it was undergoing its transformation when it was owned by TPG. That's basically the 5 years before the pandemic, and was part of the team that really thought through kind of the evolution of Cirque from where it was before to what we know about it today, where a lot of the things that Cirque is doing right now were initiated, I would say, during that period. So that was fascinating. I actually managed the resident show division for a while. I was responsible for the portfolio of acquired businesses as well. And so learned a lot at Cirque, learned a lot about managing larger organization, learned about transformation, learned a lot about the balance between business and creativity. And I think came out of it as a stronger leader.
I throw it out there because I think it's important for everybody to understand that this is not a bunch of tech guys that got together to create an environment. You are coming from a law background. There is a lot of knowledge and a lot of history here, which I think is important because I think when we get to death and we get to these scenarios, I think the trust and the faith being placed in those people that are on the other side is huge. And so I dragged it out of you, but I'm glad you went there because I think that plays a lot into the credibility of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and I think even the co-founders had quite a bit of a background here. I think the ClearEstate team, and I would say not just the co-founders, but the people that we've attracted to the business over the course of 3, 4, 5 years. we're surrounded with passionate, caring individuals. Empathy and caring is our core values. We've done a pretty good job at selecting both people in and out based on those values. And we've also managed to attract a lot of people from this space. We must have probably 15 to 20 estate professionals at ClearEstate that come from either a trust background or a legal background or an accounting background actually in this space. So there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise at ClearEstate beyond the technology, and I would say beyond my own personal background. And to your point, this business is all about trust. So we need to make sure that we're worthy of that trust and worthy of the trust that people put in us.
As we come to the end of our show, as usual, we turn to our entrepreneur, Davide Pisanu, CEO of ClearEstate, and ask him for his one piece of advice for inspiring entrepreneurs. Davide.
What I would say is that it's not easy. And by it's not easy, I mean, expect every day to bring, especially the first 3 years, I would say, expect every day to bring you a piece of news that will make you question your decisions, question whether you should have gone on this journey or not. And it's not something that when you start a business, you're a bit in love. You have a honeymoon phase where you're passionate and you go through it. But comes a time pretty quickly where things get hard, and it's the people that stick it out through those 2, 3, 4 years of hardship that make it through to the next stage. And stick to itness in entrepreneurship is I would say 90% of the battle. And various entrepreneurs will describe this in different ways. I mean, Elon Musk said it was like eating glass and staring into the abyss or something like that. But I think fundamentally, what every entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, describes is the fact that it's really, really hard. And your version of hard will be different depending on the business and depending on what segment, what market. But there will be bad news. There will be one step forward, 2 steps back every day. And it's making it through that and learning from that on an everyday basis and constantly pushing forward that makes the difference between the people that succeed and the people that don't. And this is it's not a romantic ideal. I'm not saying that, if it doesn't work, you shouldn't quit. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying every successful business has had a difficult early stage where things were not obvious, and pushing through it and believing in your North Star and pushing forward is key to success.
Mike, we talked a lot about Canada's reliance on sort of the compliance industry and bureaucracy, and here we have a product made by people who are really world-class in their approach to tech, tackling one of the most complex, difficult, and painful bureaucracies that exist in Canada right now.
Yeah, most definitely. I think, Davide said it at the beginning that, 75% of people have said it's one of the most traumatic experiences they'll ever go through in life. Having been involved in many estates over the years, even if it's not your family, even if it's not necessarily, someone that's that close to you, being involved in the process is cumbersome. It's time consuming, and unfortunately, anybody the people you're going to work with have just lost somebody. I mean, there's got to be an empathetic approach to all of this. You have to have some kind of feeling, yes, it's bureaucracy. Let's call a spade when you get right down to it. This process, and that's whether as Davide said, whether you have $25,000 or $25 million, there's a bureaucratic process that knows no dollar limit, and I think for a lot of people that in and of itself is massively intimidating.
Davide Pisanu, CEO of ClearEstate. Thanks so much, Davide.
Thank you.
Don't forget to subscribe to Inspiring Entrepreneurs Canada as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, or your favorite platform. And because we've been a radio show for so many years, we're just getting our podcast game going, and we'd appreciate the 5 stars if you've enjoyed today's show. Thanks, Mike. See you in a couple weeks.
Thanks so much, Dan. See you soon.
ThinkBait. TNKR Media. Good talk.